Eagles Entertainment.
With the 13th pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by LifeBrand. I'm your host, Fran, Duffy, and today we're going to continue our recap of the 2022 NFL Draft. As today, Ben Fennell and I are going to do a review of the NFC and AFC South divisions here with this past draft, and just take a look at who the top players were, some of the surprise impact players, who could impact this team from day 3 in the NFL Draft, and also take a look big picture at all of these franchises. What did they do in draft weekend? What does that mean about their team building philosophy? Just things to kind of file away for later, not only for this season, but for next spring as well, when we're getting ready for the 2023 NFL Draft. Always a fun exercise. Going to do that here with Ben Fennell at the top of the show in Draft Buzz. As always, the best way to throw us your support, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a review. Look, if you've got a topic that you want us to cover, if you've got a question that you want us to answer, if you've got something that you want us to do a deeper dive on, now's the time. We've got the offseason upon us here from an NFL draft standpoint. Training camp's just around the corner. We'll be starting our previews for the 2023 class by the time we get into the heat of the summer. So through the month of May, through the month of June, if you've got any ideas, any topics that you want us to explore further, that's the place to hit us up. Go on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us the comment there in the comment box. We'll get to it here in an upcoming episode. That said, let's get this one rolling. Excited to talk through these two divisions with Ben Fennell in Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, excited to start things off here with Draft Buzz. And actually, Ben, you have no idea that I'm doing this, but it occurred to me that last week we did not do our kind of like recap of some of the different games that we had played throughout the course of draft season. And one of the things we did, it was, I believe, our last episode the week before the draft, I presented you with some over-unders. And so we're going to say like, we say it like, we'll check and see how we did later. So now's the time. The bell is tolling for to see how you
pulling
did.
Out the receipts. Pulling out the receipts. All right, let's see what we got.
So over under. I put over under 0.5 quarterbacks in the top 10. Essentially, did you think a quarterback was going to go in the top 10? You said under, so you hit it. So you're 1-0. Running backs in round 1, I hit it at 0.5. You said under. All right, so you're 2 for 2 here.
Loving these receipts.
This is where things go off the rails a little bit.
Oh, here we go.
So at wide receiver, I had the over-under at 1.5 wide receivers in the top 14. You took the under at 1.5. The number actually ended up being 4. We saw 4 of those receivers go. So Drake London went at 8, and then you had the Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams trio from 10 to 12. So the house wins there at wide receiver. Tight end, I said 0.5 in the top 45. You thought there was a chance that Greg Dulcich could go that high. Nobody went that high. Trey McBride was the first one off the board at number 55. So that's the second buzzer there. So you're 2 for 4 here to start things off. Offensive line, 2.5 tackles in the top 5. And we thought, do we feel good about this? And you hit the under. You said the under, which was right. I don't think either of us thought that it would be 0, though, and it ended up being 0, which is wild. That still happened considering all the tackle talent in the top in this draft. But O-line, you hit the under. Your only miss the rest of the way was defensive line. So I said 4.5 defensive line in the top 14. You took the over. That 4.5 was a really solid line there, Ben, because it was 4 on the nose. So it was Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson 1-2, Kayvon Thibodeau at number 5. And then not another defensive lineman until Jordan Davis at 13 to the Eagles. That gives the house the win there. But all the other ones you hit linebacker, you hit corner, you hit safety. But I thought you'd enjoy the fact that you did pretty well in the over-under.
You're scaring me there. I didn't know what the receipts were going to look like.
No real huge outlandish takes. In fact, also, in going back and looking at our on the clock segments, you were very excited about you correctly pegging earlier in April Matthew Butler to the Raiders on day 3. You'll be happy to know that was not your only win in the on the clock series. You also, back in February, pegged Luke Fortner from Kentucky going to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
You correctly hit that one. And I actually hit Jalen Armour Davis to the Ravens back in March. So you got one correct, or you got 2 correct. I got 1 correct. None for Dane there. So
well, let me take a little break here from pat myself on the back with those picks. But if I could just say and continue to praise myself, the mid-round picks of the On the Clock, are so hard because you're literally making up a draft scenario of who you think would be available, who's the team interested in, what are their needs or based on their board. So the fact of the Fortner one and the Matthew Butler one, which I precursored as the toughest assignment yet on the clock, and to have nailed those two, this may not be the last time you hear about this.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We do have editing privileges here, so we can always cut out anything. So maybe it might not be the last time I hear of it, but it'll be the last time our listeners hear of it.
I don't know if I need a trophy or a plaque or some hardware, but maybe some sort of like endearing bell or a ring for the podcast, just to let them know that, there were some winners out there.
Well, you can make yourself a t-shirt, there's something like that. Also, it was worth noting for the mock draft extravaganza, we had a couple of dead on the nose hits. Jordan Renan with Evan Neal to the Giants, Tony Pauline hit Garrett Wilson to the Jets, Bo Wolf, Jordan Davis to the Eagles, Nick Underhill hit Chris Olave to the Saints, Justin Mello from the Draft Network hit Traylon Burks to Tennessee, and then we had a bunch of others. We had 10 others that were right position, wrong player for a bunch of those teams. So a really fruitful exercise there with the mock draft extravaganza. And obviously things got a little off kilter early with Derek Stingley going number 3 to Houston. That was something that didn't develop until draft week. And so with that kind of off the board, that kind of it was a house of cards with the rest of the draft. But I felt like it was a good exercise, the mock draft extravaganza once again. So Ben, let's get to the primary purpose of your arrival here on the podcast, and that's to go through these two divisions. And we'll start here in the NFC South, where the first thing I want to hit on, the Atlanta Falcons, and they obviously select Drake London there in the top 10, as we mentioned earlier. In your mind, why was Drake London the pick? They had their choice of all the receivers. They don't have Calvin Ridley this year. They have their choice of any receiver in this draft. Why do you feel like they went Drake London over Jameson Williams, over Garrett Wilson, over Chris Olave?
Well, I feel like as they're figuring out the identity of this football team, particularly on the offensive side, particularly at quarterback, there's a clear need to retool all these weapons around whoever that quarterback will be, looking like Marcus Mariota for this year, potentially Desmond Ridder or somebody else from year on out. And, for them to take Kyle Pitts last year in the top 5, turn around and take Drake London, adding high-level weapons to the offense, no matter who's going to be at quarterback. So I think retooling this offense after the Julio Jones, Matt Ryan era, which was successful for a really long time, they're kind of building from the ground up here. So I think adding these high-level weapons to threaten defenses is the name of the game. And adding a Kyle Pitts with a Drake London, it's a pretty imposing one too. And I think it's DJ or Bucky or somebody that always kind of references, you want to build a basketball team. And I think adding all these athletic, exciting, long, explosive weapons is how you win in the NFL on offense. And I think 1-2 with Kyle Pitts and Drake London, it's not a bad start.
I'll give a lot of credit to Todd McShay, who had pegged them taking Drake London. I mean, not just like, in the April mock draft, not just in the March mock draft, but going back to like February, he was consistently pegging Drake London to the Atlanta Falcons. And I do wonder, when you talk about building a basketball team, I kind of wondered they already have their power forward. They already have their big man inside with Kyle Pitts. And so I kind of wondered if that was a little bit of a redundant selection. And that's why I had always thought with them, maybe more Jameson Williams, maybe more Garrett Wilson, someone else to give them a little bit more sizzle and speed and quickness. But, they talked about how much they prioritize, the size and toughness aspect. And certainly that's what they hope to get there from Drake London.
Yeah, I think replacing that Calvin Ridley role in the offense was the shoe-in one-to-one replacement, like you were mentioning, more of a route runner and over-the-top guy. So to add somebody that kind of embodies what Kyle Pitts does, it's a bit redundant, but it doesn't mean it's not threatening and it won't work or be successful. So they're two very high-level, exciting weapons for the offense.
No doubt. All right, well, let's get to the next category here, and that's someone who could surprise us with their day one impact. I'll come to you first here. Who's a guy that you feel could surprise us with their day one impact on this from this draft class?
Well, I think it's a guy that just knows how to get to the quarterback, and that's Arnold Ebiketie. He may not be this imposing run defender, may not play a high volume of snaps, particularly on early downs, but I think this is a guy that can easily fall into double-digit sacks, not only based on his own ability, but based on the need that the Falcons clearly have at edge rusher. I think pairing somebody on the opposite side of Lorenzo Carter there, and they got some other interesting high-level players later in the draft we'll touch on, but there's a clear need for somebody to win off the edge and get quarterbacks. He may just be a rush specialist his first year, but I think his impact is going to be sneaky surprising. I bet he get his hands on a couple footballs, a couple impact plays on third down. I really think Arnold Ebiketie is going to load up the stat sheet when he gets on the field.
And along those lines, I mean, D'Angelo Malone, who was their final third-round pick, they actually had 4 picks there on day 2 of this draft, 2 in round 2, 2 in round 3. D'Angelo Malone is another guy for that same reason, could find his way to on the field. This is a team that had needs everywhere, and they certainly had needs in the front 7. And I could definitely envision scenarios where both Ebiketie and Malone are on the field together. Malone, extremely productive, a ton of experience over the course of his career with the Hilltoppers. So would not shock me at all if he found his way on the field as well. And what's interesting too, Ben, and I love this term, they categorize both those guys pressure players. That's been like, it sounds like that's the way they categorize those edge rushers is pressure player. So both guys, you could say, have that ability to get after the quarterback. For our next category here, let's talk through a day 3 ceiling. Who has the highest ceiling of their day 3 picks? And look, they had all those selections on day 2. That meant they only had 3 selections on day 3. Tyler Algier, the running back from BYU, is a guy that, Ben, I mean, there's a pathway to him being kind of a bell cow back, an early downs ball carrier for this team. Obviously, Cordell Patterson still there in Atlanta. He had that hybrid running back wide receiver role. It started as more receiver, then turned into more ball carries out of the backfield as the season went on last year. But they cut Mike Davis right after the draft. They have Damian Williams there, who they signed in free agency. But Algier, I mean, there's definitely a path where he could see a pretty critical role for this offense there as a rookie.
You know, and in a similar conversation, that's kind of how I feel about John Fitzpatrick, their 6th-round pick out of Georgia, which may had some people, you know, watching the draft shuffling through papers. Hey, who's John Fitzpatrick on Georgia? Wasn't featured in the pass game. Did a lot of dirty work for that high, you know, rushing attack offense there down at Georgia, hand in the turf, blocked a lot of defensive ends, didn't get a lot of glory in the pass game. John Fitzpatrick's a good football player. And if you look at Kyle Pitts, they brought over Anthony Firkser from Tennessee, who's obviously going to know Arthur Smith's system. I'm looking right at Firkser and saying, I'm coming for that Y tight end job. I want to be off the tackle. Kyle Pitts, you go succeed in the pass game, be that move tight end, the flex guy. I can do the dirty work in the run game and then throw me a couple off play action in the red zone. I really think John Fitzpatrick's best football might be ahead of him.
I love that. For me, like just looking big picture at this team before we move on, 2 things really stand out to me. Number one, this is the 2nd draft class in a row, and this is the 2nd draft class under Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot. Toughness, competitiveness, like those buzzwords, consistent with every single draft choice that they've made. Almost to a man, every single guy, I think you would put in that tough category. So Arthur Smith actually said that in the post-draft press conference. It's like, if you want a tough team, you got to draft tough players. And that's certainly something that they really abide by. And the other thing, too, and Terry Fontenot, he comes from New Orleans. New Orleans is a team that they have not been afraid to dip into the smaller school ranks for guys, whether it's early on or late. You know, they obviously, like they've had guys from all levels of competition come in and find success there. They're following through with that here in Atlanta, not afraid of schools from outside the Power 5. They've alluded to a bunch of those guys where it helps that they played in the Senior Bowl, but a third of their draft class last season came from outside the Power 5. This year, I mentioned that they had 4 picks on day 2. Every single one of those guys came from outside the Power 5. Troy Anderson, Montana State, Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati, D'Angelo Malone from Western Kentucky, right? And they took Tyler Algier early. So outside of Ebiketie, then you take Tyler Algier early on day 3, right? So not afraid to go outside the Power 5 for these players. And I think that's just something to remember and kind of file away for next year.
And I'll occasionally at the end of these do a call my shot on maybe an undrafted to make the roster. Put me down for Brad Hawkins, safety out of Michigan there. Kind of the opposite profile of a Richie Grant they took last year. Richie Grant, explosive, huge hits, impact plays. Brad Hawkins is that boring safety, reliable tackler, does his job, good on special teams. I see a pathway for him making that roster.
All right, let's transition now to the Carolina Panthers and their top choice. We mentioned it was a surprise to us that no tackles went in the top 5. Well, that meant that the Panthers had their choice of all the tackles, and they went with Ike Ekwonu, the left tackle from NC State. In your mind, Ben, why was he the pick?
Well, they clearly had a need at offensive line. Seems like I'm echoing that statement from the previous draft class. And a lot of people wanted to know, are they going to turn the page and be aggressive, go get that quarterback of the future? I got news for you. No quarterback of the future is ready to play behind that offensive line. They would have been swimming uphill there. So I'm glad they're addressing the trenches first, build your roster inside out. And Ike Ekwonu is a very high-level talent. I think is one of the most advanced run blockers I've ever studied. I think he's a shoe-in left tackle day 1 to start, and I think it'll be his job for the next 8-10 years or as long as he wants it. So I'm glad they're building through the trenches, Let's get the run game going. Let's get Christian McCaffrey back on the field and healthy, mix in some Chuba Hubbard in there, take some pressure off the quarterback. Let's see if Darnold can maybe turn the tides. We got Matt Corral later on, but we needed to address the offensive line. It was no secret. I'm expecting a lot of Brady Christensen this year, a couple other free agents there, Cade Mays late in the draft, fix the O-line, let everything else kind of unfold after that.
For me, just looking at it, even if you just want to like take it from a 3,000-foot view, what are two things that we know to be true with Matt Rule and the kinds of players he wants to bring in, whether it's here in Carolina or when he was at Baylor or before that Temple, is he wants athletic traits players, guys with a track background, and that's Ike Ekwonu, and also toughness, prioritize toughness, and Ekwonu, the toughest arguably of those three guys up top. So not if you had told me before the draft, okay, they're going to have their pick of the three tackles and they're definitely going tackle, I would have said the pick would be Ike Ekwonu for those reasons. Now, let's get to the next one here. Surprise impact for year one. This is an interesting one because I don't look at any of these guys and say, like, oh, I feel great about their ability to come in and have that day one impact. But I guess we got to talk about Matt Corral, right? As you know, they trade up for him. This is a system where they leaned on quarterbacks being able to make plays with their legs. A year ago, we saw Sam Darnold as a really good scrambler, especially down inside the 25-yard line. He came through with a number of touchdowns early on, was really effective from that role. And again, this is a team that wants to be able to get the ball out fast. With plenty of RPOs with Ben McAdoo as the offensive coordinator. Could Corral come in and challenge? I think that's up for debate. We'll see if he's able to come in and see if he can make some waves in the quarterback competition.
Well, I think Corral's ability to create out of structure and maybe get that offensive line out of some more bad situations, that's just something Sam Darnold never really translated from his time at USC, where he was a really high-level athlete, despite maybe not looking like it, an exceptional basketball player, really mobile. Got to the Jets and his eyes would drop, and he just wasn't playing as fast. Same thing in Carolina. The escapability just isn't there with Sam as much. So I think Matt Corral's athleticism and the live arm, I think he's going to be able to make plays when he gets out there. May not always be in structure or kind of, in sync, but I think his ability to be a high-level athlete and play very loose, I think this guy can make plays. He's going to make plays on the practice field. He's going to wow us in the preseason, and he's going to have, the coaching staff on a week-to-week basis of saying, should we go with the young guy and let him play? Like if they start 1-3 or maybe like 2-4 and don't get off on the right foot, this could be Matt Corral for 8 to 10 games down the stretch. And I'm really excited for his opportunity.
Day three here in this draft, just kind of looking at upside. They take Brandon Smith, the linebacker from Penn State, Amari Barno from Virginia Tech, offensive lineman Cade Mays from Tennessee, and then Kalen Barnes, the corner from Baylor. If I had to pick one guy to have the highest upside, I'd probably go Barno. I think when you look at his rush off the edge, what he can be down the road, a converted linebacker, has only been playing with his hand in the dirt for a couple of years now. So you say, okay, we can kind of bank on this guy moving forward. Had a ridiculous week at the combine in Indianapolis. He'd be a guy I'd kind of peg as having the high upside there from that day three group.
And I really like the way they kind of groom some of these younger and raw players, the way they brought up Yetur Gross-Matos, the way they kind of groom Brian Burns into what he is in that scheme of Phil Snow. So I like that Amari Barno probably doesn't have to be a core player, doesn't have to be an early down defensive end, doesn't have to do a lot of things. He may just be a sub rusher. And for a young guy that's, running in the 4.3s at his size, Fran, that's exciting. Focus on one thing to do. I think they're going to give him a very absorbable and kind of digestible workload. And it may just be, hey, 3rd and 5, you're in there and go rush the quarterback and play with your hair on fire. And just like kind of mentioned with Ebiketie, I think that's a situation. These guys may, as rookies, have some really high-level impact plays. Amari Barno is a very interesting prospect.
We talked about big picture with the Panthers. I mentioned athleticism and toughness. The other trend that has really been apparent over these last 3 years with Matt Rule there in Carolina, heavy lean towards the Power 5. They've made 24 picks in those 3 years. Only 3 have come outside the Power 5, none this season. So athletes who are tough from the high level of competition, that's an easy blueprint to kind of keep in mind there for the Panthers moving forward. Just something to keep in mind there for when you're doing your mock drafts down the line for the Carolina Panthers. Let's now go to the Saints. And this is another team with a really interesting slot of draft choices here. They trade up, give up a handful of picks to go make Chris Olave the 11th selection in this draft. He's the 3rd receiver off the board after Garrett Wilson and Drake London. Ben, why Chris Olave over, say, Jameson Williams?
It's a good question. That they were kind of 1-2 on a lot of people's boards. And, if you wanted an explosive over the top guy with that exceptional, vertical gear, it was pretty much those two you were considering. And, Chris Olave to the Saints seemed like it was really kind of gaining steam down the stretch of the process. And that was a popular kind of mock choice in the middle of the first round, whether the Saints were going to sit where they were or trade up to go get them. But they needed speed on the outside. And if you compare Chris Olave with a Michael Thomas and an Alvin Kamara, I think there's some really interesting complementative skill sets throughout there. Readdress the offensive line with the next pick, figure out the quarterback maybe in a year or two, but adding Chris Olave and his skill set with the Michael Thomas and the Marquez Callaway and some of the guys they already have, and it's a really nice complementative kind of receiver room right now.
What I find to be interesting is that if you look at like all of like the big, draft analyst mock drafts down the stretch, in April, the final week of the draft, by far the two most popular players pegged to the Saints, Chris Olave and tackle Trevor Penning. And so it's just kind of easy to kind of pinpoint, all right, like this team, where their eyes are set here in the draft. They also kind of shocked some people with Alontae Taylor being the selection there in the early part of round 2, Ben. And he's a guy I want to talk about in terms of surprise day one impact. This is a team that plays a ton of sub package. Alontae Taylor's got some position versatility in that we know he can play corner. He's done that in the SEC for the last 4 years. But some people feel like he could play safety as well. So I kind of wonder, could he play kind of like that PJ Williams role? Maybe not year 1, but maybe year 2, year 3. Can he be that kind of that big dime safety for them? But early on, it seems like he can. Honestly, it's very similar to the kid that they took out of Stanford last year, Paulson Adebo. Very similar kind of profile in that big physical man corner on the outside who tested really well, but some people question, does he have the ability to stick in man-to-man coverage on the outside? Is he more of a safety? The Saints play a ton of man, so clearly they're not worried about Alontae Taylor, but he'd be a guy I'd watch here for a guy who could play more, a little bit more than expected in year 1.
It's funny you mentioned Paulson Adebo and PJ Williams' role in that defense, Dennis Allen, because one of my comps for Alontae Taylor was Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Yeah. Another guy in that Saints defensive back room was kind of that tough guy nickel coming out of Florida there. And I really think this is a new era on the back end for the Saints. They brought in Honey Badger, no more Malcolm Jenkins. They brought over Marcus May, brought over Daniel Sorensen, added Alontae Taylor. I think it's open season. I think every spot is kind of up for grabs. I guess Marshawn Lattimore is going to be over there at the corner spot, but every other spot, I think there's going to be a lot of flux. We know Honey Badger is going to be involved. We know, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is going to be involved, but where? These guys are all very versatile, can do a lot of different things. And Alontae Taylor just fits into that group perfectly. Can play corner if you need him to. Can play back end safety if you need him to. Will come up and play the nickel if you need him to. You want to play Will linebacker? I bet he'll strap up and do that for you too. He's that kind of tough guy out there. So really fun group on the back end.
Of their day 3 selections, which there were only 2, Appalachian State linebacker DeMarco Jackson and an Air Force defensive tackle Jordan Jackson. Who do you think has the highest upside between that pair?
I actually think Jordan Jackson's going to play a lot for this team. And they're a team, they don't care where you're drafted, where you're from. I'm looking at Shai Tuttle and David Onyemata pretty much as the 1-2 defensive tackles in front, kind of sandwiched in between Cameron Jordan and Marcus Davenport. They will rotate defensive tackles in there. They like to play heavy. They play a versatile front. I think Jordan Jackson's a really good player. I'm so happy he was drafted because he's absolutely warranted at 6'5", nearly 290. That's a Saints type right there. He can play end. He could play 3-tech, probably play some 1-tech for you. I fully expect Jordan Jackson to be in the rotation this year. And
just looking big picture at this team, I mean, to me, the trading is certainly a big one to keep in mind, right? That this is a team that is going to be extremely aggressive. They have shown it year after year after year after year. If they see a player that they like and they can go get them, they are not afraid to pull the trigger and go up and move up in the draft. They are perfectly fine walking away from a draft with 4 picks or 5 picks, whereas some teams will look at that and say, man, that's a really light load. I'd much rather have 8, 9, 10 picks. The Saints are the complete opposite. And it's just fun seeing the 2 teams that can have such vital differences in how they approach that process and still find success in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. And my shot for the Panthers undrafted, let's go with Charleston Rambo. Okay. He's going to make that receiver room. And for the Saints, I think Abram Smith is coming for Mark Ingram's job, and they're going to have some dollar amounts to consider for the front office. Abram Smith out of Baylor. He's a 225 between the tackles guy. I think he makes his team.
Yeah, they had Latavius Murray. He's that kind of guy as well.
Yep.
Like he's that kind of runner, and it definitely fits their style there. Let's now go to the last team that we're going to cover here in the NFC South, and that's the Tampa Bay Bucks, who did not make a first-round pick. They traded back on night one of the draft. They ended up picking up the first pick in round 2, and with that pick, they selected Houston defensive lineman Logan Hall. Versatile player, inside, outside. They can use him in a bunch of different ways. He's still a little bit unrefined, but that is okay with this team. They are perfectly fine drafting traitsy players that are a little bit unrefined if they're tough and athletic. Logan Hall checks a lot of those boxes. So not a shock for me that he ends up there. What do you think about him fitting into this Todd Bowles scheme?
Yeah, strong, versatile player, really embodies a lot of the things William Golson did at Michigan State coming out. A little bit tall for a trench player, pad level stinks at times, but has some really good twitch and the ability to get up the field, whether it's at the 5 tech, the 3 tech, or somewhere else on that front. So William Golson may not excite a lot of people. He is a tough, hard-nosed football player that's been in this league for 8-9 years at this point. That's a Bruce Arians, Todd Bowles type of player in there. They like their tough guys on the defensive line. They're not looking for a whole lot of finesse. You better be able to play the run and do it from a variety of spots.
Who's a guy that you look at in this class that you think could shock us with the impact they have as a rookie?
Put me down for both the tight ends, Cade Otton and Ko Keefe. Ko Keefe out of Minnesota in the 6th round, absolutely warranted getting drafted late. He is just a hard-nosed, block you off the field, ankle biter out there in the run game. And Cade Otton, unfortunately, the injury late in 2021 really hurt his stock, in my opinion. Couldn't go to any of the all-star games, couldn't show out at the combine. Really good combo tight end. So Cade Otton, Ko Keefe. I know we don't see Rob Gronkowski on the roster right now. It's pretty much Cameron Brate, and that's it. Look for these two to be heavily involved in 2022.
Yeah, I would have said Cade Otton as my pick for everything that you highlighted there. I will mention it. If you squint, you can kind of see a little bit of David Johnson with Rachaad White, Ben, in terms of like the height, weight, speed profile, even like the negatives. Like I didn't think that David Johnson was like the most natural, instinctive runner between the tackles in tight spaces. Like he was decisive downhill, like you got him on a track. And that's kind of how I view Rachaad White. And obviously the pass game value is big there as well. So if you squint, you can kind of see that. But we know that the big thing, if you're going to play running back next to Tom Brady, like you've got to be able to protect. And that's going to be the big question there for Rachaad White, if he can get on the field as a rookie from that standpoint. Day 3 ceiling, a guy that we like on day 3 that's got high upside. For me, I mean, you mentioned Ko Keefe from Minnesota. Like I look at Zion McCollum from Sam Houston State, the corner.
No question.
If you're talking like height, weight, speed, he's as impressive as anybody in this class. And then when you pair that with the experience and the production, I mean, this guy has been consistently productive. He's had at least 3 picks every year of his career down there at Sam Houston State. 6'2", ran in the 4.3s, was at the Senior Bowl. Like I don't know, why is this guy last till round 5? He had some missed tackles. He had, there's sometimes I know the production was always there, but he looks a little bit awkward at times playing the ball. But if you're going to get this guy in round 5, to me, like he checks a lot of the boxes we've seen from Todd Bowles corners in the past that have come in and made an impact. I mean, he fits the same profile as, the Jamel Deans and the Carlos Davises and all those guys.
You literally just took my notes right off the page here. I said absolutely Todd Bowles type of corner, 200 pounds, but athletic, tough, will play the run, special teamer. Carlton Davis, Jamal Dean, Zion McCollum, they're all cut from the same cloth. I just feel like the Bucs are one of those teams that just checking the boxes as far as what their trends and their types are. They did not, deviate despite some front office shakeup and some new people maybe making the decisions. They really made some Bucs picks out there. And I think these are really kind of easy to line up.
Yeah, it's been tough to kind of track them from like a trend standpoint, but I think it's like a fitting the system, fitting the coach and what they've got in place. And clearly for a team that is gearing up for a Super Bowl run, I think that you can kind of latch onto that and say, okay, well, does this guy fit? Does this guy make sense for the scheme that he's going into? And I think you could say that for a lot of these guys that are going down to Tampa Bay.
Eagles fans, Merrill Reese here to tell you about the Eagles Autism Challenge presented by Lincoln Financial Group. This annual ride, run, walk event supports autism research and programming as we work hard every day to advance the conversation from awareness to action. This year's event will take place on Saturday, May 21st at Lincoln Financial Field. With your support, we can help transform the lives of individuals affected by autism. Register today at eaglesautismchallenge.org.
Let's now go to the AFC, and we'll go with the team that has what do you think? Maybe the number one pick here in this draft, Trayvon Walker. Ben, at the end of the day, we talked about this almost ad nauseum leading up, but why Trayvon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson?
Different strokes for different folks. I think Trayvon Walker's upside and his explosiveness as an athlete and how he was used at Georgia, I think maybe presents a higher ceiling and more long-term upside, and based on how you can use them. Two really high-level players that I think both organizations are looking back laughing and thinking they got the guy they wanted, whether it was the Lions with Hutchinson or Walker here with the Jaguars. At the end of the day, you're picking 1-2 for a reason. You're not one player away. You're a lot of players away. Add high-level players to the locker room, to the roster, and figure out what to do with them later. And I think that's what a lot of these teams in the top 10 did. They really addressed the trenches in particular. The Jags had a lot of needs, particularly on the defensive side. So adding a high-level player like Trayvon Walker that could do a lot of different things for you, that's kind of a part of the rebuilding process. So I hope they're not picking in this spot for another year.
So one thing, to your point, is just collecting good football players, right? And I think it's interesting that they went out and in free agency, they went and got Foye Oluokun, the linebacker from Atlanta. Then they trade up back into round 1 and they take Devin Lloyd out of Utah. Then at the top of round 3, they take Chad Muma. Just like a lot of high-end assets here this offseason going into the off-ball linebacker position. And look, again, you're just trying to get good players. Are all of these guys going to work out? You don't necessarily know that, but I think just kind of looking at how this team addressed that position, I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, that is kind of to kind of look at where these teams that are clearly rebuilding, what they're focusing on first in the rebuild is really interesting. I don't know who hurt this team in the linebacker room last year, who couldn't get lined up or, maybe get the calls in properly, but somebody is scarred in that front office because they hit reset on that linebacker room and hit it aggressively. Like you had mentioned, free agency and 2 high-level players in the draft.
Between those 2 linebacker picks, they took Luke Fortner, we mentioned earlier at the top of the show, out of Kentucky at center. Seems like he's in line to start right away. Brandon Linder retired at center, so Fortner, and he was a guy that we had discussed him on the show. He just rock solid across the board, and you felt like he could come in and start early on. It looks like he's in line to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. He was my surprise impact pick there. I think he's going to be the day 1 center and never look back.
All right, day 3 selections here. Snoop Connor, the running back from Ole Miss. Washita Baptist corner, Gregory Jr., who was a late addition to the Senior Bowl. And then Monteric Brown, the corner from Arkansas. Of those 3 guys, who's your high upside pick there, Ben?
I think, Gregory Jr., I think, coming from the small school and the way he tested, I thought really competed well down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, really showed the flashes. But, if you didn't get your name called in those 7 rounds, that's okay. I think a Kevin Austin out of Notre Dame can make this team. He's an explosive player, undrafted free agent out of Notre Dame, really a 1-year player at Notre Dame, but an exceptional tester, can do a lot of different things, special teams at the end of the day. And look out for E.J. Perry. I really think he's coming for that backup spot. C.J. Beathard, I'm putting your picture in my locker. I'm going to be quarterback 2 this summer, preseason, and I want to be Trevor Lawrence's backup for the season. So look out for E.J. Perry, who was kind of a sleeper late in the draft, and there was a chance he was going to get his name called out of Brown there. So really high-level player as well.
Real quick, you mentioned Kevin Austin. I do think it's interesting just looking at the potential wide receivers that they're going to try and see if they can put in front of Trevor Lawrence. Think back to Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. Who did he have the most success and the most comfort throwing to? Big body, like oak trees that could run, right? The T. Higgins and the Justin Rosses and like the young guys they've had there the last couple of years, right? He likes those like tall, long-limbed receivers that can go up and get it. Kevin Austin, that's where my mind went when you brought up Kevin Austin. He's one of those guys, at 6'2", 32, 33-inch wingspan or arm length. Like he can go up and get it. That kind of rung true for me when you talked about Kevin Austin and what he.
And if you look at the money they spent on Christian Kirk and Marvin Jones and Zay Jones are nice players too. They're kind of guys that know how to separate, went over the middle of the field. Kevin Austin, more of a linear plane guy, in my opinion. He can do some shot plays, some back shoulders, huge catch radius. He'll block special teams. I think he can make this roster and have an impact.
All right, well, let's take a look at a team that had 9 choices in this draft, and that's the Houston Texans. They had 2 picks in the top 15. They had 2 picks in round 2. Then they had a bunch of day 3 picks. So a lot to pick from here. But let's go back to number 3. Derek Stingley Jr., as I mentioned, was kind of like a late development going into the draft that he was going to be pegged to be that pick there for the Houston Texans, number 3. In your mind, why did they feel comfortable going with Derek Stingley Jr.? Clearly one of the most talented players in this draft, regardless of position.
I don't think Derek Stingley was the best all-around cornerback in this class. I think that was Ahmad Gardner. But Derek Stingley was the best press man cover in this class, maybe last class, and maybe the class before that as well. He is that high level of a press man cover corner. He was built in a lab to erase receivers, mirror match, play the ball down the field with perfect technique and exceptional traits. So I just think Derek Stingley's ability to just cover is so valuable. That's why he's taken with the 3rd overall pick. That's why, because he can do things that you really can't teach. You can't coach. So he has a lot of Darrelle Revis that I think he's going to erase receivers and give the defense a lot of flexibility with the 10 on 10, elsewhere. So I think Derek Stingley's ability to say, I got this guy, you guys worry about the rest. That has so much value in today's game, whether it's on Sundays, Saturdays, Fridays. If you can cover and press man, tremendous value. That's what Derek Stingley does.
No question. I had no arguments here from that standpoint. Just in terms of impact, rather than talk through like a surprise impact, I also want to just talk about Kenyon Green, the offensive lineman from Texas A&M, who they selected at 15 overall after the trade down with the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think when you look at Kenyon Green, certainly the versatility will help them. This is a team that has some questions at tackle. Laramie Tunsil, how much longer is he going to be there? Titus Howard, he's going into a contract year. How much longer is he going to be there? So he can plug in and play guard right now, and potentially be one of the tackles in year 2 or year 3. So Kenyon Green, I think that makes a lot of sense. And when you talk about just the toughness aspect, what they want to try and be, I think that pick made all the sense in the world from that respect. And also, look, Nick Caserio coming from New England rather. They're not worried about like value in terms of like what the consensus feels in terms of about specific players. Obviously, we talked about that last week with Cole Strange going to the New England Patriots. This is to a much lesser extent, but yeah, Kenyon Green may have been a little bit of a surprise for some people in top 15. But I think that at the end of the day, like this is a team just looking to acquire players that fit them and fit what they're looking for at the end of the day.
Yeah, Kenyon Green's a guy that I think is on a track to being like an Elton Jenkins style of player.
Yeah, sure.
Who's saved that offensive line in a number of games and a number of weeks with his versatility. So still figuring out where he's going to play for next year for the Packers. Same thing with Kenyon Green. He could end up being a Pro Bowl left guard this year, and he'll be the right tackle for the next 10 years. He's one of those guys. So I'm really happy he went in the middle of the first round. I think he's that high level of a player, despite the lack of Texas A&M success, and maybe despite them wanting him to be on a higher level track as a prospect, considering how he was as a freshman, as a sophomore. Kenyon Green is a very impressive player. So I think him and Laramie Tunsil will be a fun 1-2 to watch, despite what the scores are each week in Houston.
So I think I know how you feel about their trio of day 2 picks. They took Jalen Petrie, the safety out of Baylor. I know you love him. John Mechie, the wide receiver from Alabama. Tough not to like him. I obviously, look, he's coming off the ACL, but tough not to like John Mechie and what he can bring to an NFL team. And I'm pretty sure you and I were on the same page with Christian Harris, especially in the middle of round 3. Like, just to me, like a really, really intriguing value there for the Houston Texans. So with that in mind, loving those day 2 picks, let's look at day 3. And they took 4 guys here. Dameon Pierce, the running back from Florida, Stanford defensive tackle Thomas Booker, Oregon State tight end Tegan Quitorano, and then LSU offensive tackle Austin Deculus. Of those 4 players, who do you feel like is the highest upside for this team here moving forward?
It's going to be tough not to pick Dameon Pierce.
Yeah.
I mean, he just had some of the most fun tape at Florida, at the Senior Bowl, the Combine, his workouts. Very infectious guy to watch with just his attitude and intensity with running the football. Not a whole lot of wiggle and shake. And I love it, Fran. He wants to run through defenders, knows how to drop his shoulder, lower his pads. Absolutely a beast through contact, good in pass pro. Will catch the ball too, not just swings and angles. He'll catch it down the seam, as he's done a couple times this year on some big level plays. Seeing Marlon Mack, Rex Burkhead ahead of him on the depth chart. Dameon Pierce might be leading this backfield group in touches in 2022, or maybe snaps, maybe just staying in the pass pro. But Dameon Pierce, he's a guy I'm really excited to see where he landed. I'm happy he's going to Houston. Maybe not the most competitive team this year, but that means he's going to get on the field. I'm excited to see what he can do.
Real quick for me, I would go Thomas Booker as well from Stanford. And this is a guy it's tough not to like him on tape. He's really technically sound, played up and down the line of scrimmage, a number of different techniques. He showed the ability to win off the ball, tested well at the combine. He's an A-plus kid off the field. You just start checking box after box after box with Thomas Booker from Stanford. And you're like, yeah, like this guy could come in and play a role in the NFL as a defensive lineman. And I could see a potential starter there in round 5.
Thomas Booker was the other name I had written down. And Houston fans out there, don't forget about Austin Deckles coming over from LSU. This guy has played a lot of football in college, 3,300 snaps, 61 games played at LSU, some high-level games in the SEC. Very little this guy hasn't seen. I think he's ready to come in and play. Where is he playing? Is he taking Titus Howard's job at right tackle? Probably not this year. But if there's an injury, look for big Austin Deckles to come in and maybe be a mainstay for years to come.
Real quick, big picture, looking at Nick Caserio, his second draft, and obviously last year was a complete opposite. You had a bunch of picks on day 1 and day 2. You didn't really have much of that last year. I think their first pick was round 3. They took Davis Mills. I think when you look at some of the players they took last year and in conjunction with this year, and we'll talk about Davis Mills too, because I think he kind of fits. They're not afraid of guys with small sample sizes or guys that maybe fell due to some medical concern. And Davis Mills was a little bit of both of those, right? But they had those questions about Derek Stingley Jr., John Mechie coming off the torn ACL. A couple of these other guys, when you get into day 3, had some nicks and bruises here that kind of dinged them a little bit. Jalen Petrie, I know there was word about him with some medical stuff, right? So I think with all these guys, that's just something to keep in mind, that they're not afraid of small sample size, and they're not afraid of guys that may have a perceived medical issue as well. So just something to watch here as we go into year 3 under Nick Caserio from an NFL draft standpoint. One more team here that we're going to hit on with the AFC South, Indianapolis Colts. Don't have a first-round pick, but they do, however, have a second-round pick here, Ben. And I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts into why you felt that Alec Pierce, the wide receiver from Cincinnati, was the 53rd overall pick here for the Indianapolis Colts.
Man, I loved their day 2 picks, and I felt that they were such Colt picks out there. I just felt Chris Ballard and Frank Reich clearly have a type. They have a new defensive scheme, new defensive coordinator, and Gus Bradley coming in there, taking over from Matt Eberflus, I believe, who's now the head coach of Chicago. But Alec Pierce, high-level tester. I thought he did really well in the offseason programs. Didn't necessarily see that on tape all the time. And that's okay, because he's a guy that I thought knew how to win in the route, can win with speed, win with releases, play very tough, good run blocker. He's a guy they would motion in really tight and some short yardage stuff. Every bit of 6'2", 212 out there, Fran. So he had good size, played in high-level games at Cincinnati as they played Alabama in the playoff. They played Georgia in the bowl game the year before. This guy can beat high-level SEC corners in a tough guy package. And then he tested exceptionally well, too. He's just fitting that Michael Pittman mold. And they lost Zach Pascal to, us this offseason. So we hope to do them right and get some good usage out of him. But Alec Pierce, I just think fits that Chris Ballard type of presence at receiver where they really like. They're big guys. They're tough guys with an exceptional athletic gear as well.
And for me, like in terms of just a surprise day 2 or a surprise impact, how about Bernard Raymond, their 3rd pick there on day 2, the left tackle from Central Michigan. Eric Fisher still unsigned, another former Central Michigan tackle for what it's worth, still unsigned. Raymond could step in and play. And obviously, him being a little bit older, that's what you want, right? Like you want the guy, and that was always the kind of the knock on the profile for Bernard Raymond is that he's a little bit older, but some still saw a guy that was still a little bit developmental. Had only been playing offensive line for a season and a half, right? So I think when you look at Raymond, that was the big question. But with that pathway there, I mean, there's no reason why he couldn't come in and compete to start right away.
There's some teams that need a high-level, intelligent, veteran, mature starter right now. We're not looking to go through some growing pains with a 21-year-old that's, great. His second contract will come at 24, and we're looking down the road. We just signed Matt Ryan. We're trying to win right now. And I got news for you. We need a left tackle. And Bernard Raymond, I don't care if you're 21, 22, or 34. If you're, a high-level player and we need that high-level player at that position, you're probably going to come in and play for us. So we don't want to go through the growing pains and maybe the young gun type of, maturation process. So I'm happy Bernard Raymond got taken, and I see him as their day 1 left tackle, week 1, protecting for Matt Ryan.
All right, well, let's get to day 3 surprises there. And we've got 4 picks here on day 3 with the Indianapolis Colts. Missouri State defensive tackle Eric Johnson, Youngstown State tight end Andrew Ogletree, Cincinnati defensive tackle Curtis Brooks, and then Yale defensive back Rodney Thomas. So, Ben, what do you think here? Day 3 upside. First of all, how many of those 4 guys did you actually study? Because I can tell you right now, I only did 2 of them.
I did the 2 defensive linemen, so we'll focus there. And we won't do the Senior Bowl guy, Eric Johnson. We're going to do Curtis Brooks.
I love Curtis Brooks, man.
Fran, me too. That number 92 in the middle there was just an absolute bulldog. And I was trying to watch somebody else, and I think it was the Shrine or the NFLPA Bowl practices, and ended up just watching his one-on-ones. All sorts of moves. He had spin moves from the no shade spot, which you don't see very often. He had all sorts of rip moves, club moves, all sorts of juiced up. He's a guy that can get up the field. And when I look at the guy right in front of him on the depth chart, Grover Stewart, you just tell me when you want to get tagged out on 3rd down. I'll come in and be that sub-rushing guy, to kind of fill you in, which clearly isn't what Grover Stewart does there at nose tackle at 320. So I really think Curtis Brooks is a guy that can get on the field in some sub looks and really affect the passer. He's a guy that can get up the field and beat offensive linemen with his pass rush. So Curtis Brooks maybe didn't get the love on that Cincy defense as they were just loaded. He's a really good player and disrupted a lot for that defense.
Honestly, it's a very similar profile to Devontae Wyatt, because you're talking about a guy that did not really kind of take off until that super senior season. So he's going to be a little bit older. He's going to be a 24-year-old rookie, but at 6'2", 287, similar kind of body type, just took off and was one of the best players on one of the best defenses in college football this year in his final season. And to me, just a very well-refined player that won with his hands and did it in a number of different ways, both against the run and against the pass.
Yeah, and before you dive into some of the big picture stuff of Chris Ballard's picks, I just felt like there were so many picks that were Colt picks here for a variety of reasons, whether it's the tough guy receivers out there, versatile offensive linemen, offbeat school selections, like taking Andrew Ogletree out of Youngstown State.
Yep.
And I very much think Jelani Woods is going to be that Y tight end, number 1 tight end on the pecking order before the season ends. He's got to beat out Mo Alley Cox and Kyle Granson, some guys on the depth chart. Jelani Woods, they took him in the 3rd round for a reason. This guy's going to be involved.
Well, and it speaks to their process, man, because they want speed, they want traits, they love traits, and so like Jelani Woods makes a ton of sense. And as you mentioned, they're not afraid of guys from smaller schools. I mean, coming into this draft, over a quarter of their picks were outside the Power 5. And when you look at this slate of picks, I mean, they on day 3, Missouri State, Youngstown State, Yale. They took Central Michigan in round 3. He was there, Chris Ballard, in Kansas City when they took Eric Fisher, number 1 out of Central Michigan, right? So I think when you look at his track record, they are definitely not afraid of going the small school route. And that's just something to keep in mind here for this team moving forward into the future drafts. Let's round this discussion out, man, with the Tennessee Titans. And obviously they make the trade. A.J. Brown going to the Eagles. That was a little bit of a surprise. I don't think anybody expected that happening on draft night. But they go and they try and find his potential replacement with Treylon Burks, the wide receiver from Arkansas. Is this just kind of an apples for apples, just trying to see, find a similar kind of player? How do you view this?
Well, that's the best way to sell it, I suppose. Yeah. Who a lot of people had as their comparison for Treylon Burks was an A.J. Brown, that thick, explosive presence, that heavy slot type of player. He could run some in-breakers, catch and run stuff, receiver screens, bubbles, but can win down the field in that kind of unsuspecting frame. Very much like the way Andre Johnson did, very much the way like Sterling Sharp did, where they're just so strong, so thick, so rocked up. You don't think they can beat people vertically, and then 2 steps and they're gone. So I really think Treylon Burks is going to be a great 3-level threat for that offense, and definitely a Mike Vrabel Titans type of pick with his kind of toughness and personality.
Yeah, I mean, they love tough players. They love young players that produce. Usually it's guys that test a little bit better, but Burks was a guy that obviously his play spoke for itself. And you are hoping that he becomes A.J. Brown. And look, the path is there for him to get a boatload of targets. Like no A.J. Brown, no Julio Jones. I mean, it's A.J. Brown, it's Treylon Burks in that receiving core right now. To me, it makes a ton of sense for him to get a ton of targets as a rookie. Looking through the rest of that draft, is there anybody else where you're like, yeah, this guy could make an impact here in year 1?
Yeah, put me down for Nicholas Petit-Frere being their starting right tackle in week 1. I see a great track for him to potentially be the starter, if not just be a high-level swing tackle. He has to beat out Dylan Radunz right now, who I don't know if they even love that tackle. They want to keep in at guard there. They clearly have some other needs on the offensive line. So Nicholas Petit-Frere, they took in the 3rd round for a reason. I think he's going to be heavily involved. And all those reasons you just mentioned, the receiver room, not a whole lot of presence there. No A.J. Brown, no Julio Jones. Well, they got Robert Woods. They also took Kyle Phillips in the 5th round from UCLA. who I think can really claim that slot receiver role and be that possession receiver that can win. They had Adam Humphries, I think, a few years ago. Right now, it's that Nick Westbrook-Ikeen player who's kind of been that middle of the field slot presence. So Kyle Phillips, Mike Vrabel is going to love this kid. This is a hard-nosed kid that will stick his face in the fire, run block for you, do some dirty work. I think he's going to be one of those guys that Mike Vrabel just has a, kind of arm around each day in practice there, and he's going to get some playing time.
Thank you for reminding me of Robert Woods. So it was a bad miss by me. I forgot that they had traded for him earlier this
Free agency and trades, Fran, it's crazy in the offseason. This year was tough to catch up. Usually I'll just, preseason time and training camp, I'll start to catch up. Yep. It is a turbulent spring and then a winter to catch up with the free agency.
So let's look at day 3 here in terms of like upside. You mentioned Kyle Phillips. For me, how about Hassan Haskins? This is when Derrick Henry got hurt last year, they were just swimming, trying to find who can replace him. It was done by committee, and you're not going to find a 1-for-1 replacement for Derrick Henry. But they didn't have a guy that could be that hammer on a down by down basis. Hassan Haskins is a hammer on a down-by-down basis, and he's not as explosive an athlete as Derrick Henry, but he has got that ability to be that kind of bell cow. And so I think when you look at Haskins, his fit there, I mean, they've taken some backs in the draft in recent years that just have not worked out and that are already off the team. Haskins could be a guy that steps in and immediately is the 3-down backup to Derrick Henry. And if he were to get hurt again, he'd be a guy to watch to take over the starting job very, very quickly.
Yeah, and that's a presence in the offense. I'm wondering, do we just keep him there as insurance if Big Henry goes down? Or do we need to start kind of preserving Henry, maybe take some of the workload off of him for the longer stretch runs into the season and to keep him healthy or preserved? So I hope they kind of pair them together and take a little of that pressure and workload off Derrick Henry. And for a lot of things you had mentioned, put me down for Chigo Okonkwo out of Maryland of having a day 3 high ceiling. I see Austin Hooper came in free agency. Jeff Swain are kind of the incumbent tight ends. They have Torrey Carter as more of a traditional fullback. Chigo Okonkwo, I think, can be some be some H-back. No question. Yeah, I think he could do some fullback stuff. Jonnu Smith, whether it's the Delaney Walker type. Yeah, I just see him lead blocking a couple plays, and he's going to leak down the seam or, run a wheel off a lead action. He's going to be a guy that's going to do some high-level stuff, I think, in the pass game, do some dirty work, do some special teams. Another guy, an absolute Mike Vrabel pick all day long, and a really good kid off the field as well. So Chigo Okonkwo, I'm really excited for his landing spot.
It's a good call. Well, look, that'll do it for our recaps here from the AFC and NFC South. We'll be back next week. We're going to go once weekly here for the time being on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll be back. We'll continue our divisional recaps of the 2022 NFL Draft. Again, make sure you jump on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. If you've got a question, if you've got a suggestion for a topic you want to hear in an upcoming episode, that is the place to leave it, and we will address it here in the coming weeks. That said, that does it for today's episode of the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by LifeBrand. We'll talk to you next week.